Leading through today's workplace changes and challenges means constantly reinventing work and re-engaging the workforce. As senior partner and global leader of transformation services at Mercer, Ravin Jesuthasan is making sense of these rapid shifts as they emerge. Today we'll discuss his current research and his direct experience with leaders on the front lines of change. Thanks for joining us, Ravin.
Oh, my pleasure, Abby. It's lovely to be here again with you.
Absolutely. So good to see you again. So let's start with this massive study you've been conducting on global talent trends. You have data from 12,000 executives and investors. So let's start with, what surprised you the most? What did you expect to find that turned out to be wrong?
It's been a fascinating survey, Abby, that we've been now running for 12 years. And it allows us to look at both how attitudes and the state of practice are changing. The thing that jumped out at us were a couple of things. One is perhaps unsurprising. 99% of C-suite executives expecting headcount reductions of up to 20% over the next 2 years as AI substitutes and augments work. In 2 years' time, executives expect the proportion of work carried out solely by humans with no AI involvement to shrink from 50% today to 35%. So those are, I think, the not so surprising findings. The thing that jumped out at me the most was how the investor perspective is shifting. It wasn't long ago, Abby, that we could AI wash an earnings announcement and reliably count on a 3 to 5% bump in the stock price the next day. That narrative has really flipped on its head to the point where shareholders are increasingly penalizing companies for AI washing their earnings. Shareholders increasingly understand, professional investors specifically, that AI is disrupting skills at speed and scale, and they're looking for signals of how that skills demand is changing and for insights into how those skill gaps that are emerging are being addressed by CEOs and their leadership teams. 97% of investors say that they would actively disinvest from organizations that had a less progressive approach to the agile deployment and development of skills across the organization. However, only 50% of C-suite leaders believe that they're actually addressing these challenges. So that really jumped out at us.
So as investors' knowledge and understanding is increasing, they're asking much harder questions.
Precisely.
Yeah,
precisely.
So you make the case that work design is now a core leadership capability, not just an HR or ops function. So why is that such a hard shift for organizations to make?
It's a really good question, Abby. And I want to connect it back to something that I saw in Davos this year at the World Economic Forum, where after 3 years of conversations about the sexiest new use case for AI, the latest model and how it had evolved, we were starting to see executives move beyond the spray and pray phase of AI deployment. And we saw that in this survey as well, where more and more, it's easy to start with the tech and it's easy to be seduced by the tech because it is compelling, it is sexy. It is overcoming many of the traditional things that have underpinned economist Robert Solow's paradox of having seeing the technology all over the place, but not in the productivity statistics. Mm. And the key feature now is the usability of tech out of the box, which has really overcome some of those challenges. But the hard work where executives struggle is the second part of Solow's paradox, which is how do we reinvent the work? How do we redesign workflows, redesign the jobs, redesign the architecture of work around what the technology can do, as opposed to starting with the tech? Mm-hmm. And we saw that in the survey as well. 63% of C-suite leaders now saying that redesigning work to get to the optimal combinations of talent and technology is their biggest opportunity as an organization. And 72% of investors agreeing that the companies that get to that logical combination are the ones that are best positioned for competitive advantage. There is the continuing challenge of both the C-suite and HR being misaligned on some of this. So even as 63% of C-suite leaders and investors talk about the importance of work design, many HR functions, as we saw in the survey, are still focused on other priorities like the employee experience, the value proposition to attract talent, minimizing the strategic misalignment of talent at a time when they need to help the C-suite and the business reinvent work and their organizations for these machine capabilities.
So in your session description, you tease that the biggest obstacle to AI deployment may not be what we think. So what is it, and why are leaders slow to see it?
Yeah, it's funny because so many of the conversations, I'll go back to what I said a second ago, have been focused on how are the models evolving? Have we gotten the data right? So much of the focus has been on those technical aspects of the technology. Yet the elephant in the room that is really starting to emerge now is the disengagement, the active disengagement of the workforce as they are being asked to use these tools. So as their familiarity is growing, as more and more companies deploy Gen AI and agentic AI, the concern from the workforce is rising exponentially. So specifically, concern about job losses has risen from 28% in 2024 to 40% in 2026. So that's been one massive thing that has getting in the way of the workforce. And if HR is supposed to be focused on that employee experience, only 19% of HR leaders consider the negative emotional and psychological impacts of AI as part of their AI deployment strategy. Since so many leaders are focused on deploying the tech, perhaps starting to get into the redesign of work, it is the workforce that is increasingly becoming a challenge. As they are getting familiar, they are understanding what the technology can do. Yes, they're benefiting from some of the efficiency and productivity gains, but they're also being hit by the fact that they're seeing what this technology could do tomorrow and the more significant impact that it might have. They're also seeing where, as the technology is transforming the work, where it's increasing work intensity. Those bits and pieces of work, Abby, that we would all count on where we could kind of turn on to autopilot and have that take the stress of the day out. Well, those bits and pieces are the first things being substituted by the technology. And so now what's left is the time that you're focused on is all of the stressful time, right? The time to present, the time to think deeply about issues, the time to deal with an irate customer, because the transactional elements of solving a quick problem have been taken away. So a pretty significant change in the intensity of work. And, over a third of employees say that, the divide of being ready for what comes next, the divide of having the skills for what comes next, the divide of having the support for what comes next would drive them to leave their organizations. And 56% saying that unequal access to the tools and trainings and the support is negatively impacting their morale.
It makes it so obvious that this is such a big challenge and something that organizations have to focus on, that not just like how do we get more productivity, but how do we engage people and make sure that people are doing the work that they need to do to make the organization successful. So in the couple of minutes we have left, what would you say is the biggest change that you would advise leaders to make right now to address some of these challenges we've been talking about?
Yes, I would actually say that there's three things, Abby. One is, I think this pivot from being merely digitally savvy to being truly AI fluent. I'm continue to be amazed by how many C-suite leaders don't actually have day-to-day interaction with the tech and with multiple types of AI models. So real AI fluency is the first thing. The second is recognizing this long tail associated with these decisions, the long tail of legacy, the one we're coming from and the one we're going to be leaving behind. And there's two dimensions to that. One is certainly this need to bring the workforce along, as we talked about a second ago. That's super important. The second is the strategic flexibility to ensure that you can perpetually keep reinventing your business. AI is never going to be a one and done. yes, you've got some fabulous models today. Someone else is going to have a better model tomorrow. So whether it's your mindset, your skill set, or your tool set, including pedantic things like budgets, are you building in the flexibility to keep reinventing? And then the last will be this breaking from that, again, legacy of thinking of work being done in jobs and organizing teams and people in jobs with the right skills to actually having the capacity to redesign work, deconstructing it, pulling it apart, pulling processes apart, understanding the redeployment options, whether it's AI, whether AI gives you the opportunity to go to a global capability center and reduce skill premiums, and then reconstructing new, ever more agile and flexible ways of working. So three pretty significant pivots, I think, that we're looking at.
AI is definitely not making life and work easier for leaders and managers. Lots of challenges ahead. Ravin, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Abby. My pleasure. Lovely seeing you.
You too.